There you go. All right. Welcome back. Any questions? Okay. What I'd like to do is just develop a little bit on the part of the parable we just read and the whole thing of forgiveness. One of my teachers was named Liz Nagel, and she wrote a book about blessings. And one of the things that was very good is she deals with when you have to forgive, and the fact that it doesn't necessarily take away the offense. In other words, Ed works with people in prisons, and some of them, their sentence may be unjust, it may be too severe, you never know. There's not always justice in our legal system, or there's not always justice in life. And what do you do with people who are struggling with that and have to live with it? If somebody kills somebody and they lose a daughter, something like that, just because you forgive, that doesn't take away the pain. That doesn't take away. So she talked about, I'll just read a little bit of this. She says, adjusting to life in a new place. Listen to what she says. Whenever we manage to shift our attention from ourselves to those who offend us and to feel empathy with them, we set out with Jesus into new territory. When we go further and show them unmerited compassion, we image God whose likeness we bear. As we speak words of forgiveness, the divine breath carries them to our brothers and sisters. In these moments, we are among the noblest beings in the cosmos, an intersection between heaven and earth. We move in two dimensions. Ironically, as we go with Jesus into the territory of others' lives, we discover a haunting familiarity. As we grasp their predicament, we know that we have been there too and are not ourselves innocent of their faults. Well, think about that. So our hands are dirty too. What does it matter if we never did precisely the same harm they have done? Their fundamental abuse of our human dignity is all too familiar to us from our own cavalier treatment of those whom we are prone to see, consciously or unconsciously, as our inferiors. Okay, so we're now looking to empathize with other persons, just like the king empathized with her. Even after we forgive those who harm us, we must continue to live among the ruins they have made of our lives. So that's interesting. The inner terrain of our minds and the landscape of our daily routine seems like a ravaged, war-torn land. I mean, this is realistic. If somebody abandons their spouse and they have children, they're going to have a hard life. Life is shabbier. Unexploded bombs and mines lie hidden, ready to do more damage. That's reality. Just because we forgive doesn't mean that takes away all those obstacles. Those robbed of the companionship of loved ones face life alone. Those who suffer continuously the physical and mental damage inflicted by another are left with limited resources and possibilities. Those who lose the respect and appreciation of co-workers and clients through the gossip of others work less effectively. Those who forgive like Jesus agree to live with just such changes. Joseph made that decision. He took on part of the guilt, the apparent guilt of Mary or whoever impregnated Mary by being concerned with her and her family, and not just himself. And he was going to bear the consequences. As we walk with Jesus through the destruction, some of our views of forgiveness and expectations of others shift closer to reality. We expected remorse from those who harmed us. Now we accept that they may be pleased with what they have done, that they don't care. I mean, this is all realistic. They don't care. We thought that justice required equal suffering for equal damage. Now we rejoice that, given our own countless offenses against others, in God's view, this is not the case. We thought that strict justice was a more powerful response than empathy and compassion, which threatens to mitigate the offender's responsibility. Now we realize that Jesus prizes compassion above quid pro quo reckoning. We thought that, at the least, offenders would be grateful for our mercy, and that at the most they themselves would be more caring for others. Now we accept the reality that they may remain unmoved by our goodwill, and this is also true. In his book, Markings, Dag Hammarskjöld, former Secretary of the United Nations, wrote, "Forgiveness breaks the chain of causality, because the one who forgives you out of love takes upon himself the consequences of what you have done. Forgiveness, therefore, always entails a sacrifice. The price you must pay for your own liberation through another's sacrifice is that you, in turn, must be willing to liberate in the same way, irrespective of the consequences to yourself." This is beautiful. None but those who believe that the unseen God shares their deepest pain. He knows what happened. He feels it. And that they can rely on their invisible but eternal and all-powerful partner. So what you're doing is you're living the Beatitudes. Blessed are the sorrow, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You're throwing yourself in dependence. I mean, this is practical. You're not just preaching it. It's not platitudes. It's what you're living. You're putting yourself in God's mercy and providence. Filled with a conviction that God works out plans for their future happiness, they begin to transform the rubble of their lives into glorious manifestations of the kingdom of heaven. As they sweep away the debris and perform one little task after another, God's presence radiates through them ever more dramatically. Brand new and totally surprising blessings stream outward from them and into the lives of others. So this goes on to say this, and it goes on to talk about couples that do it. If anybody's interested, you're welcome to have this sheet. To me, it's very good because it identifies what's the real consequences of forgiveness. It doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't take away the memories. But you're entrusting yourself to God, and you're doing something that's described in the book of Job as being human. Now we're really human, because now we can truly love unconditionally. That was the whole issue in the book of Job. Satan says, does Job love God for nothing? He loves God because God gives him all this stuff. So God was bragging about Job, and God says, all right, you can take away everything he has, but don't touch him. So Satan does, and Job still doesn't praise, still doesn't curse God. Then Satan says to God, by the way, it's not Satan the devil, it's the Satan. It is not the devil in that story. It's the heavenly accuser. They didn't have a concept of the devil at that time. So in Hebrew, it's the accuser. The word Satan means prosecuting attorney. So it's like literally a devil's advocate, somebody who opposes. So there's this, in the ancient Near East, they had these heavenly councils. That's how they thought God did it. And even in creation, God says, let us make man in our own image. Let us, plural. So Satan says, skin for skin. You didn't hurt Job. If you do, he'll curse God to your face. And in Hebrew, the word is not curse, but bless, because they did not want to say the word curse God. It's a euphemism, so it says bless God, but they knew it meant curse. And Satan says, and then God says to Satan, Job did not bless me or curse me, even though you incited me to afflict Job for nothing. And that's the same Hebrew word. Satan asks, is Job good for nothing? In other words, is Job good because he gets something out of it? God says, you caused me to inflict Job for no reason. So that's the whole dynamic of that book of Job, is that sometimes that God wants us to love him unconditionally for nothing. And that's so important in marriage, because at some point in marriage, mutual satisfactions decrease, and one has to love the other for that person, and not because of what they get out of it. So that's the whole challenge in marriage. These mutual satisfactions go away. So then we have Job afflicted with sores on his body, and his friends come. And then Job's wife appears, and she says, curse God and die. Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. And the reason that's important is that when couples undergo crisis, their relationship with God goes into crisis as well. And then their relationship with each other is going to go into crisis. And one of the books that I'd recommend, I brought a couple copies here. There's in the book, it has a section called Troubled Families in the Bible. There's a lot of troubled families in the Bible. The Bible doesn't shy away from, we have everything. And the author is funny. He when he's talking about all the bloodshed in the family of Jacob, he says, he starts off with the fact that Jacob is a bigamist. So he's already got problems there. He's got several wives, so he's already got conflict there. He's a bigamist, Jacob is. And the author talks about couples need to learn how to bear trials together. That's the whole thing. Job and his wife did not know how to bear trials together. And there's this conflict between them. And the author uses his creativity to imagine what happened. What happened? Why did, looking at it from the perspective of Job's wife, what happened? Why did she turn on him? Probably because she saw their whole life going down the drain. All her expectations were doused. And now, as that article said, now their life is in ruins. Very difficult. How do you bear trials together? It brings to mind another couple that went into crisis, Tobit and Anna. Does anybody know that story? Well, you should read it. It's in chapter 2 of Tobit. It's a beautiful story. Tobit is a very holy man. He's kind of like Job, and he buries the dead. He goes out to bury the dead, which is a capital punishment in Nineveh, and it gets real dark, so he sleeps outside, and when he sleeps outside, some bird droppings or turds go on his eyes, and he becomes blind. So because of his act of charity, he's now blind. Well, his wife goes to work, and she spins wool, she does crafts, and she did a job for someone, and they gave her a goat in addition to her pay. They were pleased. So she brings home the goat, and Tobit is blind, and he says, "What's that I hear?" She says, he says, we can't take stolen goods, you better take it back. And she says, "It's not stolen, they gave it to me." So he's still on his justice rampage. He's a just man. He says, "We can't keep this, give it back." And she says, "I told you that that it was a gift." And she gets mad at him, and she goes like Mrs. Job. She says, "Now everyone knows what your deeds are. Now these are all revealed." So in this crisis that comes out of Tobit's justice, his sense of justice, and Anna's sense of trying to take care of her husband, they're at each other's throats through this misunderstanding. He accuses her falsely of stealing. She accuses him of having done wrong things, that's why he was punished with his eyes getting. So they both falsely accuse each other. And then we have Tobit saying this beautiful prayer. And at the very same time that he's saying this prayer, Sarah, a distant relative, is praying for death. Tobit prayed for death, and Sarah prays for death. Sarah, this is a great one for jokes. Sarah had been married 7 times, and every time she got married, during the honeymoon night, her husband died because she was afflicted with a demon. So imagine that. If you're the husband and you're number 7, You might die with a smile on your face, but it's going to be short-lived. So her mistress was ridiculing her, saying, every time you marry somebody, they die, you'll never have children. So she's really taunting her, like this Hagar and Sarah tension. So Sarah is very gentle and soft-spoken. She can't take it, so she wants to hang herself. I mean, she wants to hang herself. But then she says, I can't do it. Just like Job was merciful, because I don't want to shame my father. Then I will shame my father, and he'll go down to his grave in shame. I can't do it. So instead, she prays for death. At the very time she's praying for death, and Tobit's praying for death, the angel comes and is going to fix them both. So it's a beautiful story. I won't tell you the end of it, but it culminates in chapter 8 when Sarah meets Tobias, who is Tobit's son, who's next of kin, because all these people are dying. Who's next in line? So Tobias marries her, and the father-in-law is so worried that he's going to be digging a grave in the next morning. He has the servant go out and dig the grave so they're ready for it, because he doesn't want everybody to know this happened. And I have a handout on this. Tobias has this beautiful prayer. The only thing that Sarah says in the book, 2 words, amen, amen. It's this beautiful prayer. It's one of the most beautiful. They have it at weddings. Tobias, the book of Tobit, chapter 8, verses 4 through 9. But the whole point of this is that there are troubled families in the Bible. Joseph and Mary are one of them. Not because of any wrongdoing on Joseph and Mary's part, because God allows this. And just like God allowed all the suffering Jesus went through. So that's one reason why Joseph is such a great intercessor. He knows what it's like. And we have an advantage in Catholicism, because Joseph had an extra cross on it that the Protestants don't think he had, which is what? Joseph has an extra burden. For Catholics, Joseph has an extra burden that Protestants don't believe he has. What is it? Because Protestants don't believe that Mary was a perpetual virgin. We do. So that means Joseph and Mary are never going to consummate their marriage. He's a Jew. Jews believe sex is good. We do too. Jews think celibacy is not good. You're married and you love this person more than anything in the world, and you're not able to consummate the marriage. I would think that would put a bit of a strain. Now, I'm talking at it from a male perspective, but I think the women would understand. Again, I'm exercising freedom. I'm going from the facts. The first thing is, we don't want to angelize the biblical characters. They're flesh and blood. They're not demons. They're flesh and blood. It must have been a tremendous struggle for both of them, because the natural expression would have been for them to consummate the marriage. They have all the other, they've got it more than anybody else ever did. But for whatever reason, and we don't know, we believe that they never consummated the marriage. So when I look at that, I think, when couples have impotence, sexual problems and stuff like that, who's the saint to go to? St. Joseph. Because he had challenges, major challenges. And he understands, and so does Mary. And the other thing I thought about is, when Joseph saw Mary was pregnant, and we don't know what he thought, but he chose to be compassionate towards her. He didn't know that she was totally innocent. Not only that, he didn't know it was conceived by the Holy Spirit. So he gave the benefit of a doubt to the woman, and he also didn't know that she was immaculately conceived. He didn't know that she was sinless. That came later. I don't think Mary knew. He didn't know that. So think about it. When you give someone the benefit of the doubt, and you don't impute guilt to them, and you cut them slack, and you are merciful, You never know the degree of innocence and mercy you are giving in that person. You never know. You never know, never know. So here's someone who experienced a terrible shock, but chose to act in favor of her. And not only was she innocent, she was the definition of innocent. So the point is, you never know. And a priest once said to me that in a divorce, only God knows who the wrongdoing goes. Only God knows. Only God knows. And you never know. No, this is a true story. I had a friend who went to my church that was a Swiss guard, and he used to guard Paul VI, who I've written some books on, who was the Pope that implemented Vatican II. And he guarded Pope Pius XII, and Paul VI was his secretary. Paul VI and Cardinal Tardini. And apparently, Tardini and some of those others, when they passed the Swiss guard, they kind of just walked by him. But Montini, or Paul VI, and he would describe this, he would like bend over. I don't want to knock that thing over. He would bend over, you know, with his hat, hello, Swiss guard. All the Swiss guards wanted Montini to be Pope, Paul VI, because he was such a good guy. All of them. They loved Paul VI. And when they would talk among themselves, because they had to live together, Swiss guards say, we hope he's the next Pope. Well, he wasn't. John the 23rd was. Well, this Ernie, who was Swiss, told me he got this from a father. Pope John the 23rd went to a prison called Regina Coeli, which is in Rome. I think it's in the middle of the Tiber. Regina Coeli is the Queen of Heaven. And he started a tradition of going to visit the prisoners during Christmas. He's walking down the halls and in fact, before he goes in there, he tells the prisoners, he says, you know, I share your pain, he says, because one of his nephews was incarcerated for poaching. So, I mean, even the popes have this in their family, you know. And now, poaching is a little different than some of these other crimes, because they would probably get poaching, shooting game that they weren't supposed to, probably to live. But anyways, he knew about this infraction. And then John the 23rd, who was so funny, said, you guys couldn't come see me, so I decided to come see you. So they all laughed at that. So John the 23rd is walking down. He's a real heavyset guy with a little hat on. And he's walking down the hall, and they're all reaching to touch him except one guy. One guy is just staring straight at the wall. Staring straight at the wall. I knew what the deal was. Ed, what do you think? You work with, what do you think? Why do you think that guy's deal, he won't look at the Pope? What do you think? Why was...
Guilt and anger.
Yeah, guilt. Let's assume guilt. What do you think he did? What do you think he did that he felt so guilty about?
I don't want to
Okay. Well, I'll tell, good. I'm glad you didn't ruin the punchline. So, so the Pope stops, and he says, I want bring this man over to me. I want to speak to him. So the Pope asks him, what are you here for? I knew what he was going to say. He says, I killed my wife. I killed my wife. And John the 23rd looks at him and says, who knows if I had gotten married, what I might have done to my wife? Who knows if I had gotten married, what I might have done to my wife? And the guy sort of smiled, and they sort of cheered him up. So you never know. I mean, you never, and even John Paul, in his encyclical, Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, says that even women who have committed abortion, they may be in such, and this happens in third world countries, Africa, they may be in such situations of absolute hopelessness. They might not have adoption as an option. I like that bell. That would be good if they're having a marriage and then the bell, you know, they have that bell and it'll be for whom the bell tolls. So, so John Paul II says, I would like to have a word to you women who have had an abortion. He says, what you did remains terribly wrong, but only God knows your guilt. only God knows the subjective degree of your guilt. Only God knows it. So we can't judge these other, we can't. Just like Joseph. He didn't, he chose not to judge. Because it's painful when you don't judge. It's easier to validate yourself. But John Paul said, the subjective dimension of even the person who commits abortion is known only to God. And then he said to them, to not despair, he says, nothing is definitively lost. I thought that was beautiful. He says to these women who've committed abortions, nothing is definitively lost. Well, I was on a radio talking about Paul VI on one of the books I wrote on him, and excuse me, and I mentioned that, but I mentioned John Paul told that story. That was in his encyclical. So I get a call from a woman after I'm off the air, and she wants to know where that quotation was, because she thought it was Paul VI. I said, no, it's John Paul II. And you know what? She had committed an abortion. And she heard that, and there was such healing. And we can apply that not only to abortion, but any sin. That's one that, we have to, again, that freedom. Nothing is definitively lost. And, if that applies to abortion, nothing is definitively lost. So that's the good news. And that's the teaching of the church. And that's the message we want to get. And we go to the Bible and we see these terrible conflicts that like I wrote a book called Bearing the Unbearable, Coping with Infertility. When a couple is infertile, their ability to sustain, to bear that trial, depends on a number of factors. It's not scientific, but this is just my own insight. It depends on the kind of support they have. It depends on other stressful factors in their life. If they've got a lot of other stressful factors in their life, they're in trouble. Because how do they unpack them all? It depends on whether people are on their side or not. Depends on the kind of friends they have. Okay? Did the friends tell the husband or wife, you don't need to take that garbage. You can do better than him or her. And a priest once said to me, he said that when couples divorce after infertility or they go into grave crisis, the woman never identifies the infertility as the source. They don't. They get mad, they'll get mad at the husband. In the Old Testament, they always blamed it on the woman, but now we know it can be both. But they never can identify the source of their infertility. So when couples go into crisis, the number one thing they need is support. And one of the workshops I do is called Bearing Trials Together. And I use a book that I was talking about, I'll mention it, and the author is a cardinal. And he talks about, and he gives a number of lessons, and he says that even couples who have attained great heights of spirituality can go into crisis. So if any of you married couples having a crisis, just say it. That means that we're almost saints, and that's why. Satan loves to go after the good couples. The couples that, this is kind of me speaking, I'm not an expert in the discernment of spirits and stuff, but it seems to me, and this is from St. Ignatius too, that the people who are, on the bad path, Satan leaves them alone, he doesn't, he wants to send desolation to the people on the good path. He wants to ruffle them up. And God allows that. That's why you never make a decision out of desolation, ever. A vocational decision, marriage, whether to continue the marriage, anything. Never on emotion, never in desolation. And so the author says the first thing is that these troubles come even to people who have good marriages. And that's the truth. People go through heck. And they need all the support they can get. Retrovi works. And Pope Benedict gave an address to them. And he says, you hope for people who have lost hope. And that is so beautiful.